They are in our clothes, they're on our nonstick pans, even on food packaging. They're so-called forever chemicals, and they might be harmful to our health.
Now the NBC 10 investigators have found they are a growing threat to the water some of us drink and use every day. Investigative reporter Danny Freeman shows us what happened when one Pennsylvania borough found out its water is contaminated.
From drinking to cooking to washing up, Sarah Yost's family uses water for pretty much everything.
We only drink the city water.
So when Sarah got a letter saying the borough of Emmaus's water was contaminated with something called PFAS,
Did it work?
she was worried.
Scared of the water in your own home. What else can we do?
But we learned she wasn't the only one in uncharted waters.
Our immediate reaction was, what do we do?
Shane Pepe is the borough manager of Emmaus. In October, the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection told him 2 of the borough's 4 main wells showed elevated levels of certain PFAS chemicals. Subsequent tests showed one well had almost double the federal health advisory limit for PFAS. The second well had 10 times the limit.
It's alarming. It's scary. It's certainly not acceptable that it's in our water system.
But what are PFAS? Well, they're chemicals used to make common heat-resistant or non-stick products. They're known as forever chemicals because they don't break down easily in the environment or in our bodies. Stephanie Wine is a clean water activist with Penn Environment.
Now the science is pretty clear that they're a threat to our hormones, that they're a threat in terms of cancer risk.
Pepe says the PFAS in Emmaus likely came from firefighter foam seeping into the ground. Firefighter foam known to contain forever chemicals. And a fire training center is just steps away from one of the wells.
They've been using this foam here for decades.
But the timeline from when the borough knew about the contamination to when they shared that information has some residents concerned. The borough got the test results in late October. Then they posted about the PFAS contamination online about a month later. But then they sent a letter out to the community just before Christmas. But when it comes to the notice, Pepe says he was just following the state's instructions.
That was all through Pennsylvania DEP.
Emails show DEP provided a template and even edited language in the notification before the final version was sent out.
We informed them as soon as we possibly could and as soon as we had approval to inform them.
So the state shouldn't be creating any delays between a water authority finding out there's an unsafe level of a contaminant and us knowing what's coming out of our tap.
Another point raising residents' eyebrows, the borough decided to shut down the most contaminated well, this one right here, immediately. But it's keeping this contaminated well open to keep water flowing to residents, saying there's no immediate risk. Pepe says at least one well must stay open to provide water to the community.
As far as the information, including and definitely not limited to the idea that you can keep drinking your water, that was all through Pennsylvania DEP.
So Emmaus is a specific case.
Lisa Daniels is the director of the DEP's Bureau of Safe Drinking Water. She told us the notification time frame is standard for PFAS and health risks may develop over years, though there seemed to be a lack of communication about Emmaus's still open well. Should that well be operational?
So we can certainly check with our district staff, but I'm not aware of Emmaus continuing to use wells that exceed EPA's health advisory.
Daniels may not have been aware, but after that interview, we obtained emails showing her DEP staff was well aware one of the contaminated wells would stay open. Daniels did tell us while the state recommends a water source be shut down, that can't always happen.
If they can do so safely without that water and still operate their system.
To be honest with you, I think Pennsylvania DEP is learning as much as I am right now.
All right, so Emmaus had to then purchase a $400,000 filtration system to get rid of the PFAS in its water. But that system may take up to 9 months to arrive. The borough says it's considering now legal action against firefighter foam manufacturers to recoup some of those costs. Well, we reached out to the companies Emmaus says contributed to the contamination. They either said no comment, they don't use PFAS in their products, or didn't respond to our request. Jim.
Right now at 4:30, they're in our clothes, our nonstick pans, even on food packaging. The so-called forever chemicals that may be harmful to our health are seeping into water systems in our area. The NBC 10 investigators are digging into just how widespread this growing threat may be.
But investigative reporter Danny Freeman shows our local governments can't even agree on how to regulate these forever chemicals.
When Hope Gross visits Horsham's scenic Graham Park, all she sees is contamination because certain PFAS chemicals have been in the water for years.
It doesn't go away, so I feel like it's a trauma that I live with forever.
PFAS are known as forever chemicals because they don't break down naturally in the environment or easily in our bodies. The Centers for Disease Control says exposure to high levels of certain forever chemicals may make people sick. Horsham and neighboring communities like Willow Grove and Warminster have made headlines for years for forever chemical contamination spreading to drinking water. In 2014, the Environmental Protection Agency said the PFAS likely came from firefighting foam, historically used at nearby naval air bases, seeping into the ground. Hope is worried the issue is much bigger than her Philadelphia suburb. Should the state be testing all of our water?
Absolutely. They should be testing, but we don't have laws.
Today, there still aren't many easy ways to find out if your water has unsafe level of PFAS. The Environmental Protection Agency doesn't keep a comprehensive or updated PFAS database. Delaware posts a small list of sites being investigated for PFAS. Last summer, Pennsylvania touted water testing results for only certain areas of the state.
Right now, we're only looking at the tip of what could be a pretty large toxic iceberg.
Stephanie Wine researches PFAS for the environmental activist group Penn Environment.
There is evidence going back decades that these chemicals put us at a level of risk.
But it turns out there is no regular mandatory testing for forever chemicals at the federal level. And Pennsylvania doesn't have a testing requirement, neither does Delaware. We'll get to New Jersey in a minute.
Until we have all our water authorities required to test, we're not actually going to know the scope of the problem or where it's worst.
But not everyone even agrees on what is a dangerous level of forever chemicals in drinking water. Currently, there is no federal standard for how much PFAS in water supplies is unsafe. There is only a health advisory from the Environmental Protection Agency, which sets the recommended PFAS level at 70 parts per trillion. For now, Pennsylvania and Delaware follow that EPA level. But across the river in New Jersey, there is a statewide testing mandate and standards for certain PFAS. New Jersey says PFAS levels above 13 to 14 parts per trillion are unsafe. Remember, the Fed's advisory level is 70. And the state published a list of all water systems that violate the stricter standard. Sean LaTourette is New Jersey's Commissioner of Environmental Protection.
We as a state can decide to do better for our people than the floor set by the federal government.
In Pennsylvania, Lisa Daniels is the director of the state's Bureau of Safe Drinking Water. Does the state have an idea of just how widespread this PFAS problem is in Pennsylvania?
I don't think we know the extent of the contamination yet.
Daniels explains the state has already proposed making their own stricter standards and requiring PFAS testing. The plan looks pretty similar to New Jersey's. But the approval process will still take months as the state had to conduct its own PFAS research.
We would expect it sometime early 2023.
Delaware hopes to have its own standard by the end of the year. The EPA did not agree to an interview with us, but called PFAS a priority. The agency has done intermittent testing over the past decade, but a spokesperson told us any stricter standards or regulations wouldn't go into effect until fall of 2023 at the earliest. Hope is encouraged by governments taking action, but feels the search for a standard has taken too long.
We always seem to be behind the game. We're like 10 steps behind.
Now, we reached out to the Navy regarding PFAS contamination in Bucks and Montgomery County near naval air bases. Well, the Navy told us it has provided short-term alternatives for drinking water and is working on long-term solutions to treat water supplies in the area. And a spokesperson told us they're still investigating PFAS near those bases. And you can actually make an impact right now on this issue. The Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection is currently in the middle of a public comment period about the state's pending new PFAS regulation. You can go online and give your input, and we'll put that link on our website, NBC10.com/foreverchemicals. For the investigators, Danny Freeman, NBC 10 News.
All right, we're talking about chemicals that are in your furniture, clothing, food packaging, also in makeup, but they may also be in your drinking water. They're so-called forever chemicals that are seeping into water supplies across our area and possibly harming your health.
And while several states are working to regulate these forever chemicals, the NBC 10 investigators learned one private water provider isn't waiting for any government action. Investigative reporter Danny Freeman takes us behind the scenes of Aqua to understand how they are addressing the forever chemical threat.
This is a well station that serves a large portion of the Chalfont borough.
At this well in Chalfont in Bucks County, this water on the left is safe to drink. But the water on the right isn't, at least according to water provider Aqua. The water sample that you just took, that is water that we know has PFAS in it right there.
The raw water sample, we know it has PFAS, correct.
6 years ago, Aqua found this well's groundwater was contaminated by certain types of PFAS chemicals. Also known as forever chemicals, PFAS don't break down easily in the environment or our bodies. The Centers for Disease Control says exposure to high levels of certain PFAS over time may make people sick. Not long after the tests, Aqua spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to get rid of the forever chemicals in this well. But in the eyes of the state and the federal government, the water was safe to drink.
The federal government process is just taking too long.
Here's the issue. There's never been a federal standard for how much PFAS in a water supply is unsafe. Currently, there is only a health advisory from the Environmental Protection Agency published in 2016, which sets the recommended PFAS limit in drinking water at 70 parts per trillion. Pennsylvania follows the feds, but that's not good enough for one of the state's largest water providers.
We said we can't wait for the federal government to do the science. We needed to do something now.
Chris Crockett is Aqua's Chief Environmental Safety and Sustainability Officer. In 2020, Aqua set its limit for certain PFAS chemicals to 13 parts per trillion. That's much less than the federal advisory level. Crockett pointed to this massive 900-plus page report from the CDC, which suggested PFAS levels higher than the mid-teens is unsafe for children.
This looks like a protective and prudent level to shoot for these chemicals right now.
But we wanted a closer look at exactly how water providers find and then treat PFAS. The process starts back here at the well. The groundwater sample is taken carefully and then sent back to Aqua headquarters in Bryn Mawr.
And the entire sample is then extracted.
The goal is to isolate the forever chemicals.
This is a heated water bath.
And then measure those PFAS levels.
If I turn it on, it will get noisy.
The whole process takes about 8 hours.
I'm beginning to see why at-home tests are not really there yet.
No, not quite.
And finally, if high levels of certain PFAS are detected, we go back to the well.
The majority of the PFAS is removed in that lead vessel.
2 massive tanks clean the water here, acting like big forever chemical sieves. Aqua has purchased 5 PFAS filtration systems like these so far, 4 in Pennsylvania and 1 in New Jersey. These 2 tanks alone cost just under $1 million.
For a smaller or a community that's never dealt with this, it can be overwhelming.
Overwhelming, but necessary, says Crockett. When Aqua first decided to treat this water 5 years ago, the PFAS level was safe in the eyes of the state and federal government, just below their 70 parts per trillion limit. But we found over the years that contamination grew. And a test last month showed the PFAS level in the groundwater is now well above the federal level.
It's a lesson in not waiting for the government.
Now, Pennsylvania and the EPA tell us they are on their way to creating new PFAS regulations and standards, but neither will go into effect until 2023 at the earliest. And in the case of Aqua, we wanted to know if the cost of treating the water for PFAS is passed on to the customer. Aqua says the cost to treat the water is part built into the pricing system for the water, but they have applied for grants and are taking legal action against PFAS manufacturers to try and recoup the costs for some of those massive treatment facilities that you saw right there. And I should just say that coming up this evening at 11, we're going to be looking into the legacy of forever chemicals as researchers are trying to better understand the long-lasting health impacts of having this stuff in your body.
Let's go back to the standards, though. What are our local states, what are the feds doing?
Well, you know, Tracy, it's interesting. Everyone is looking to the EPA. Everyone that we spoke with said it would be great if the EPA just gave us a standard and then we could act on that.
Yeah.
But they're waiting actually on some of the research that we're going to be digging into tonight at 11 to even make that standard. So it's a loop that still needs to be closed.
Now to concerns over something that's found in some clothes, frying pans, furniture, even makeup. They're known as forever chemicals, and they're also in some water supplies across our area.
Scientists in our area are hoping people living in historically contaminated areas will donate their blood for new testing. And investigative reporter Danny Freeman shows us how one South Jersey town is dealing with its legacy of forever chemicals.
Rhonda Sharper has been drinking only bottled water for nearly 10 years.
I cook with it. I brush my teeth with it.
Because ever since she learned the Paulsboro water was contaminated with so-called forever chemicals, she doesn't drink from the tap.
I just don't feel safe. I don't know what's in the water.
The tap water is now treated. The borough has removed the forever chemicals, but the legacy of the contamination remains. We're talking about PFAS. It's a group of chemicals that are used to make common heat-resistant or non-stick products. They're known as forever chemicals because they don't break down easily in the environment or in our bodies. The Centers for Disease Control says that exposure to high levels of certain PFAS chemicals can make people sick.
Effects on the kidneys, the liver, the immune system. In animal studies, some evidence of cancer-causing ability.
Dr. Robert Lombach is a medical doctor and professor at Rutgers University studying forever chemicals. He explained this South Jersey borough has a long history with one form of PFAS.
Where levels of PFNA in the water here in Paulsboro were the highest ever recorded in drinking water.
In 2014, Paulsboro shut down one of its wells because of elevated levels of certain forever chemicals in the water. Soon after, nearby chemicals company Solvay agreed to pay to treat the water in the community to get rid of the PFAS. Solvay declined our interview request, but told us the company paid to treat the water without any admission of liability for the contamination. Solvay said as of July 2021, it eliminated the use of all PFAS-based process aids at the nearby facility. Michael Reed is the borough's water and sewer superintendent.
We're working hard to give them safe drinking water.
We took a ride with him, lead the way, to see some of the massive filtration systems that now remove the PFAS every day.
And we'll run about 20 million to 25 million gallons of water a year.
To be clear, PFAS are still seeping into the groundwater in Paulsboro. You've seen over the years the level of PFAS in the water has actually gone up.
Going up, yes, yes. Yes, it's going up.
But for 6 years now, Reed showed us the treated water coming out of the tap is forever chemical free.
So I like to see 6 years of PFAS-free water that the public's drinking isn't getting better in the blood.
Maybe we should talk.
And that's just one of the questions Dr. Lombach is currently working to answer.
How many active churches are there?
With a team of volunteers and scientists, Dr. Lombach is hoping to convince 1,300 Paulsboro residents to donate their blood for a new PFAS study. The goal is to better understand the long-term health effects of having forever chemicals in your body.
People want to know, well, I've been exposed, perhaps for sometimes decades, and now it's been discovered that I've been exposed to this. What can I do now to reduce my risk? And that's where we come up a little bit short right now.
And it's not just Paulsboro. This study is part of a nationwide effort by the CDC to research communities with historic high levels of PFAS, including Pennsylvania's Horsham Township in Bucks County. The data could help inform environmental regulations of the chemicals. The work that you do in Paulsboro hopefully can influence decision makers all over the country.
Yeah, that's what we hope, that, the folks here in Paulsboro are going to be contributing, to this knowledge that's going to really help everyone.
Last week, Rhonda decided to donate her blood to the study to understand what may be in her own body.
I wanted to know. That's why I did the study. I wanted to know if anything was different in my blood.
All right, so both studies in Paulsboro and Horsham are going on right now, and the researchers desperately need people to sign up. So adults can get up to $50 for donating their blood, and children can receive up to $75. Now, I should add, in 2020, Solvay, the company we mentioned there, they filed a lawsuit against a different refining company in Paulsboro, saying that company is the cause of the PFAS contamination. That lawsuit is pending. We reached out to the refinery company for comment, but have not yet heard back. Again, just a testimony years later, still talking about the legacy of PFAS. For the investigators, Danny Freeman, NBC 10 News.